As you know, on August 12, 2026, there will be a total solar eclipse in northern Spain. Well, in any case, now you know. There are probably many of you who want to see it, whether you're more or less knowledgeable or you know absolutely nothing about it. And whether you found this video after a Google search, we're going to look here and now at everything you need to know about this eclipse, especially where, when, and how to observe it. But we'll also go over the safety rules for observing the sun, regardless of which eclipse it is, because it's going to pass through northern Spain, as well as the observation methods you can use depending on your budget, and we'll cover everything, okay, from this to that. And if you have any doubts about your ability to observe it, know that the absolute minimum you need is just enough money for gas to get to the path of totality. That's all. And if you have any doubts about your willingness to go see it, then honestly, take it from an astronaut. Take 2 days off, make the trip, and I assure you, you'll have unforgettable memories for the rest of your life. Thank you. Of all the natural phenomena you can hope to witness in your life, a total solar eclipse is both one of the most accessible and one of the most impressive. Chasing a tornado or witnessing a volcanic eruption requires specialized knowledge, a significant budget, and even a considerable amount of risk. Total solar eclipses are relatively rare phenomena, but witnessing one only requires one thing: driving a few hours to be in its path. The risks involved are getting sunburned and, well, going blind, but only if you do something reckless. Anyone with common sense should come out unharmed. But well, since that doesn't really seem to be all that common, let's talk about it anyway. Okay. Talking to people around me, I also noticed that quite a few people don't necessarily know what a solar eclipse is. That's right. I think that among the regular viewers of the channel, well, it's fine, but for the others, I promise I won't leave you behind. So there's a lot to talk about. The first thing is that I hope in the coming months this video will rank well for people looking for information about the eclipse. So, if you don't know me, I'm AstronoGeek. I talk about astronomy, but not only that, so if you like incredible but true stories and want to go to bed a little less clueless at night, don't hesitate to subscribe. For those in a hurry, the eclipse will take place on August 12, 2026 in Greenland and Spain. And since I know you won't be going to Greenland, except for the one person in the comments who will actually go there, well, just so you know, the partial phase will start in Spain around 7:30 p.m. local time, and the total phase will happen just before sunset, which is around 8:25 p.m. That's the path of totality. And the shadow will come from the ocean. So if you're somewhere in that band at that time, you'll see it. The closer you are to the center, the longer it lasts, over 1:45 in the middle. So it would be a shame to think you've made it when you're just at the edge of the zone and only see it for 10 seconds. Then, you don't need any equipment to observe a total eclipse, just your eyes. It's the partial phase before and after that's dangerous, when the sun is still visible, because if you look at it directly with the naked eye, well, it's the sun, you know. You will permanently damage your retina, but if you also try to observe it through any optical device, telescopes, binoculars, or anything else that hasn't been specially prepared, you will simply end up blind. There you go. Now that we've covered the basics, I still encourage you to stick around for the details. And I'm going to structure the video as follows. First, as I said, I'm not going to leave anyone behind. So if you don't know anything about this and you just landed here after a quick Google search about the eclipse, we'll first look at how an eclipse works and how it has nothing to do with those killer blood supermoons the media sells us every 6 months. Once we're clear on that, we'll still take the time to look at this map in a bit more detail, with the good and bad places to watch it from. We'll also cover some logistics, because since you're most likely a French speaker, and if you're from Quebec or Madagascar you've probably already given up on seeing it, well, that means you'll have to travel from France. So there are a few things to consider, both practical and legal. Nothing dramatic, but it's still good to know. And finally, we'll see how to observe a solar eclipse. So, as I said, your eyes are all you need, but you can do better, whether your budget is a few dozen, a few hundred, or a few thousand euros. And most importantly, we'll see how to do it without risking your eyesight. It's not something I usually do, but today I'm going to add chapters to the video so you can go directly to the part you want to watch again. I still recommend watching it all the way through. I'm sure you'll find it interesting. Alright, after this way too long introduction, come with me, I'll show you how eclipses work. Welcome to the solar system. Here is the Earth, a sphere 12,800 kilometers in diameter. And no, it's not flat. My globe here measures 40 centimeters. Knowing that the Moon is about 3,400 kilometers in diameter, roughly 4 times smaller than the Earth, I can reasonably represent it with this ball that's 10 centimeters across. Now here's a question. Considering this scale, at what distance from the Earth should I place the Moon? I have to place it 12 meters away. And yes, the Moon is 384,000 kilometers away from the Earth. Alright, but now the Sun. So, at this scale, it's a ball 43 meters in diameter, which is located 4.5 kilometers from here. I can't afford that model, so we'll have to use the movie projector over there. The Sun moves through our galaxy, the Milky Way, but at a speed that's absolutely imperceptible on the scale of a human lifetime, and just barely noticeable on the scale of human history. So we're going to consider it fixed. The Earth, on the other hand, makes one orbit around the Sun in 365 days. Yes, that's just what years are. The Earth's orbit around the Sun is roughly circular. In fact, it's very slightly elliptical, so it's shaped like an ellipse. It's almost insignificant, but you'll see it will be important. Alright, let's change scale. And so, while the Earth orbits around the Sun, the Moon orbits around the Earth in about 28 days. But it also doesn't have a perfectly round orbit. The lunar orbit is also slightly elliptical, which means there are times when it's closer and times when it's farther from us. Most importantly, the Moon's orbit is slightly tilted relative to Earth's. So you understand that by orbiting the Earth every month, it means that every month the Moon passes in front of the Sun. There isn't a solar eclipse every month because, as I said, the Moon's orbit is tilted, so sometimes the Moon passes a little above the Sun and sometimes a little below it. In fact, twice a year, its orbit passes right in front of the Sun. But at that moment, the Moon also has to be exactly between the Earth and the Sun and not here or here or here. If it's over there, completely on the other side, another phenomenon happens. A lunar eclipse. So be careful. An eclipse is the apparent disappearance of a celestial body. A lunar eclipse is when the Moon disappears. A solar eclipse is when the Sun disappears. Alright, let's change scale again. So, before we continue with the solar eclipse, let's quickly talk about the lunar eclipse. The Sun is the solar system's only light source. On the opposite side, the Earth casts a shadow. That's why it's night. And so, twice a year, as I was saying, the Moon's orbit is aligned with the Sun, and if the Moon passes behind the Earth at that moment, it will temporarily disappear into its shadow. Well, not exactly disappear. In fact, the Earth has an atmosphere, and our atmosphere diffracts and scatters the sunlight. Basically, in the evening when the sun has just set, you can't see it anymore, but the sky isn't black yet. The scattering of certain wavelengths of sunlight makes the sky red. Alright now, imagine you're in space far behind the Earth, the sun is hidden, but all around the Earth you see the atmosphere which scatters the sunlight, and so it appears red to you. In fact, behind the Earth you see a sunset all around its edge. Alright, here I cheated, I made my projection red. You know, because my inflatable Earth doesn't have an atmosphere. So, let's continue. As the Moon moves behind the Earth, it gradually enters its shadow. You can then see a kind of weird crescent moon that quickly gets smaller. Then, when it passes completely into its shadow, it doesn't disappear entirely. It is lit by the faint red glow of the sunset all around the edge of the Earth, and then takes on a beautiful coppery hue. That's what we call a total lunar eclipse. And by the way, not a super blood moon. Besides, it's not blood red and it's also very dark. And by the way, I told you earlier that the Earth isn't flat. Well, this is a phenomenon that can't be explained by the flat Earth model. If the Earth is flat, how can you explain that? When the Moon is on the opposite side of the sky from the Sun, not only does the Earth's shadow fall on it, but that shadow is also rounded? Okay, but now look at my model. I can see this lunar eclipse from anywhere. When a lunar eclipse happens, it's during the full moon, and at that moment the Moon is visible from literally half of the Earth. Anywhere it's nighttime. Here, at the scale of my model, I'm in space, and yet I can see it. Moreover, Earth's shadow is almost 4 times larger than the Moon. So even if their alignment isn't perfect, well, an eclipse can still happen. This explains why lunar eclipses aren't that rare, and generally they can be observed in a large part of the world. And while I'm at it, unlike solar eclipses, lunar eclipses aren't dangerous. You know, the moon, well, you can observe it all year round with the naked eye. Alright, but now let's take the opposite case. If the moon's orbit is aligned with the sun and the moon passes in front of the Earth at the same time, then we can expect a solar eclipse. So, you probably know that by chance, the moon and the sun appear to be exactly the same size in the sky, which leads some people to say that it can't just be a coincidence. Well, it turns out that's not true, because if it were true, solar eclipses would only last a fraction of a second, just the time it takes for the moon to perfectly cover the sun. As I told you before, the orbits of the Earth and the moon are slightly elliptical, so the moon appears about the same size as the sun in the sky.
Hey, that's a lot of about already. I should start charging you royalties.
Huh. Okay, so my address is Astronomy, 12 Rue des Ratés 67,000 Oslo, Putzerheim. He's giving my real address, that idiot.
Zeraim. Very well. Okay, I'll send it to you right away.
Depending on the time of year, Earth can be closer to the sun, making it look slightly bigger. As for the moon, it can be farther away in its orbit and therefore appear smaller. So much so that if an eclipse happens at that moment, the sun extends all around the moon, and that creates an annular eclipse. That's what will also happen in Spain on January 26, 2028, but we'll talk about it again by then. Conversely, the Earth can be farther away on its orbit, so the sun will appear smaller and the moon can be closer and therefore appear larger. Because it is larger than the sun, it covers it for a longer time. This will also happen during the eclipse in Spain on August 2nd, 2027, one of the longest of the 21st century with totality lasting more than 6 minutes as it passes over Egypt. But now look, the shadow of the moon on the Earth is very localized. Before, during a lunar eclipse, you just had to see the moon so half the world could see it. But now, to witness our solar eclipse, you have to be right here, in the small area of shadow, and that shadow area still has to pass through inhabited regions. It often only passes over the pole or the middle of the ocean. This means that even when an eclipse happens, it's not always visible unless you travel to remote places like the middle of the ocean or extremely cold regions at -30 degrees. So technically, solar eclipses are not a rare phenomenon. However, the probability that you can observe one is relatively low, and that's why I strongly encourage you all to take advantage of the opportunity. The next total eclipse in France will take place in 2081. So if you're waiting for it to happen near you, you'll be waiting a long time. And if you think it's not worth it, well, let me describe it to you a little bit. I'll pack up and tell you about it. So imagine, in just a few hours, the sunlight gradually dims to the point where you might feel like you forgot to take off your sunglasses. If you pay attention, you can notice strange phenomena around you, like crescent shapes in the shadows. If you're not paying attention, you could be in the middle of an eclipse and not notice anything different. But that's true for a partial eclipse, like the one that will happen in mainland France. For example, who remembers June 10, 2021 or March 29, 2025? No, because France had a partial eclipse on those dates. But it probably didn't leave you with any incredible memories. On the other hand, if you find yourself on the path of a total eclipse, you'll remember it for the rest of your life. Because this happens, in the last minutes of the partial phase, you feel like the sun is a tired light bulb about to give out. The light around you is strange, much too dim to be natural. When totality arrives, you suddenly see a gigantic shadow rushing toward you on the horizon. A huge black column in the atmosphere. It's the shadow of the moon, and it's coming toward you at several thousand kilometers per hour. Then the sun disappears behind the moon. Suddenly the temperature drops. The birds stop singing, the dogs freak out, and people are screaming around you. They're screaming with joy. I've never seen anyone scream from fear. Believe me, if you're in the crowd at that moment, the atmosphere will feel festive. In the sky, the sun is black, and all around only its corona, meaning the solar winds it ejects into space, is still visible. Sometimes orange spots appear around the moon. These are solar prominences. But above all, it's nighttime, in broad daylight, to the point that in the sky you can see stars and recognize the constellations. But it's a strange night, because you can clearly see that the horizon isn't black and that far away, a few hundred kilometers away, it's daytime. A bit like at dawn or dusk, except it's not to the east or west, but all around you. Then, after 1 or 2 minutes on the horizon, you see a wall of light rushing toward you. The shower of light that's behind the shadow of the moon, and suddenly, as quickly as it had disappeared, the sun reappears. People start screaming again and even applaud when the first rays reappear. At first, the light is very strange once again, as if the sun were a tired light bulb. But gradually, it returns to normal, and that's it. You'll have memories you'll talk about for the rest of your life. And if you're not rolling in money, this experience might only cost you a few hundred miles on the road. You can split the costs 4 or 5 ways if you carpool. So, I'll say it again, take it from an astronaut. If you've never seen a total solar eclipse, or if you're hesitating to go see one, I promise you a one-of-a-kind experience. Quite a few people told me they didn't see the point of going for 100 in Spain when you can get 90 in Alsace, or even 99 or 99.5 in Biarritz. But solar eclipses aren't measured in percent. I can guarantee you that at 90% someone who hasn't heard about the eclipse could show up at work and just say, "The light is weird today." A 90% eclipse also requires at least some equipment to be observed. At 99% the light will be very strange, that's for sure. And maybe even in Biarritz, you might be able to see the black column in the atmosphere passing by in the distance to the south. But well, that's all. No night in the middle of the day, no black sun, no birds falling silent, no scenes of jubilation in the crowd, just a sun that looks like a tired light bulb. So, it's nice, right? But it's nothing compared to the show that will happen a few hundred kilometers further south. So, well, I know that not everyone will be able to make time that day. But if you can take a day off and spend a day driving, I recommend you do it. Eclipses are hard to see because they often happen on the other side of the world. This time, it will be just a few hundred kilometers away by car. For me, it's about 1,500 kilometers each way. And I fully intend to make the trip. And so, now that I've convinced you, yes, I have convinced you, let's take a closer look at the question, where is it? So, a rough map of Spain is good. A detailed map is better. The description includes a link to the site Eclipse app. The site gives you a zoomable world map and all the features of the eclipse based on the point you choose. This way, you can find out the duration of the totality phase, as well as the exact start and end times of the eclipse depending on the location. Because obviously the moon's shadow is something that moves, so I can't give you an exact start time, duration or end time. It totally depends on the location you are considering. So the site lets you know the details of the eclipse, an estimate of the weather based on the annual sunshine rate, but also the height of the sun above the horizon and the places where it will already have set. Yes, because in Spain the eclipse will happen relatively shortly before sunset. So, it's perfect for photos, just to include a bit of landscape in them. But obviously if you're in a deep valley or behind a mountain, well, you might miss the show. The shadow will arrive through the Bay of Biscay, so the sun will be higher there than for those along the Mediterranean, even though, in principle, being over there shouldn't be a problem. Now let's talk a bit about clouds. So, you might tell me that mid-August in Spain it shouldn't be a concern, and honestly I hope the sky will be completely blue. But there's a catch. What determines the formation of clouds is what we call the dew point. Basically, air always contains a certain amount of water in the form of gas, and up to a certain point, well, you just don't notice it. But air can only hold water up to a certain limit, which is called the dew point. And beyond that, the air is saturated with water, and it starts to form droplets or mist suspended in the air, which we call fog near the ground and clouds higher up in the sky. But here's the thing, the dew point isn't fixed. And one of the main factors that influences it is the air temperature. And at a given humidity level, you'll reach the dew point faster in cold air. So let's take a normal case of good weather. The air contains a bit of water. That same air rises into the atmosphere by convection and cools down. Once it reaches a certain altitude, it cools down so much that it reaches its dew point. The water condenses around dust particles suspended in the air and bam, you have a cloud. Alright, but that's on a normal clear day. A day when the sun continuously warms the atmosphere. You see my point. During the eclipse, solar radiation and atmospheric temperature will both decrease. The consequence is that even if the weather is expected to be clear, if the air humidity that day is close to the dew point, the arrival of the moon's shadow could cause a layer of clouds to form in just a few minutes, even if it's thin. That's exactly what happened during the Mexican eclipse in 2024. The weather that day was variable, but when the moon's shadow arrived, the sky clouded over in just a few minutes, and we had to rush almost 20 kilometers to find a gap through which we could see totality. And of course, right after, as if to taunt us, the temperature went back up and the clouds disappeared. And so we come to the next point. I advise you to be mobile. I suspect that a lot of people will take the train because they don't really have another option, but if you're somewhere where the sky is cloudy or about to get cloudy, well, you're stuck. Well, it'll still get dark, but you'll miss the solar corona. And once again, you can count on good weather in the middle of August in Spain, but, well, we were also counting on clear skies in the middle of the desert, so, well, keep an eye on the weather. Now, being mobile and therefore being in a car also has a lot of disadvantages. The first one, is that you won't be the only ones. Along the Atlantic coast on August 12th, 2026, you should expect terrible traffic, with traffic jams and the impossibility of finding parking spaces. And in my opinion, the Guardia Civil, the police, will take great pleasure in ticketing every offender they find. In fact, some estimates put the number of astrotourists who might travel to see the eclipse at several million. Imagine the chaos on the roads and imagine the windfall for the Spanish government. Every foreigner who's parked illegally, drives poorly, or generally doesn't know the Spanish rules adds another fine to the government's coffers. I've heard about hotels with rooms at 1,500 euros along the path of totality. The guys know a crowd is coming, so they'll make a profit without hesitation. So obviously you can criticize the greed of people who are going to take advantage of the eclipse or not, right? Okay, but in any case, complaining isn't going to change anything. So as a spectator of the eclipse, you first have to ask yourself how to avoid trouble. If you find a cheap place to stay along the eclipse path or can arrive the day before, take it. But that will get more complicated. Option B is to stay farther away from the path of totality, where it will be cheaper, and drive there on the day itself. That's convenient since the eclipse is in the evening, you have the whole day. However, expect that a lot of people will have the same idea. So the road on the day itself is going to be a complete mess. So don't wait until the last minute. I would even say it's better to leave very, very early, find a quiet spot and relax for the rest of the day while waiting for the moon. But if you're in a car and the weather is uncertain, you can decide at the last minute or almost, to change locations. So, a lot of people will prefer the Atlantic coast. There are beaches, the horizon is clear, you can see the shadow coming from far away, and the sun will be higher in the sky. And so, either you decide to follow their lead at the risk of getting stuck in traffic, or you decide to watch the event further inland. Once again, Eclipse.app shows you the areas to avoid if you don't want to end up behind a mountain. At that point, you may not have the sea, but you'll be able to enjoy the eclipse more peacefully. Also, still according to Eclipse.app, you have a lower probability of cloud cover around Zaragoza or Valladolid. Be careful, I'm telling you this today, over 3 months before the eclipse. This data, it's just averages. And so, that's the next point. Among the things to pack in your luggage, you should already have a weather app with an eSIM if you don't have a data plan that works abroad, a translation app if you don't have a Spanish speaker with you, but also, sunscreen. Though the sun is weaker at day's end, you might still find yourself staring at it. Also, make sure to bring some water. A lot of water, because in August in Spain it's hot, especially if you're stuck in traffic. Now we also need to talk about camping options. With hotel prices and crowded campsites, many of you may choose to pitch a tent spontaneously, which is my preference too. However, in Spain, the rules about camping are very strict, so let's go over that to make sure it doesn't end up costing you even more than a night in a hotel. Yes, because depending on how serious your wild camping is, the fines range from 30 to 3,000 euros. So the first thing to know is that in Spain there are 3 types of overnight stops. The first one is parking. If you park your car and sleep in the trunk, well, it's your car. and no one can forbid you from doing that. However, in Spain, there are lots of areas where long-term parking or overnight parking is prohibited. I'm mainly thinking of several coastal areas. So sure, you can do whatever you want in your car, but if the area limits parking to 2 hours, well, that's fine for a nap, but it's not much for a night. Next, there's bivouacking. As for bivouacking, it's the act of sleeping rough somewhere, but only with the bare minimum of equipment. Basically, outside of the mountains, it's you and your sleeping bag right on the ground. Depending on the place, even a tent can already fall into our last category, wild camping. Because wild camping is about setting up any camping gear outside of a designated area. The Spanish authorities circulate this illustration among tourists. If you sleep even on the roof of your car, you are not encroaching on the surroundings, so well, it's considered parking. But the slightest awning, the slightest thing that sticks out, including a camping table and chairs, is considered wild camping, and it's forbidden in most regions. Simply putting a camper on blocks, even if nothing sticks out, is considered wild camping. And well, once again, put yourself in the cops' shoes for a moment. Even if they're not told to meet quotas, they'll see thousands of foreign tourists passing by, so a good number of them will probably just completely ignore the rules in place. First, it's a reminder of the law. Second, a lecture. The third one, and everyone after that, gets a hefty fine. And you won't be the first or the second. Here, I'm only referring to people who ignore the rules in good faith. But there will also be others. In fact, I shouldn't have to say it, but given the piles of crap you find by the side of the road, I'm saying it anyway. If you came with a full bag of chips, you can leave with the empty bag of chips. If you trash the side of the road, you're just like what you leave behind. Trash. Have some damn respect for other people. Another very important rule in Spain. It's a reasonably arid country. You don't light fires. Not even with a gas stove. It's strictly forbidden. And don't do it just for your own safety, do it for your wallet too, because I'm telling you right now, you'd be better off renting a hotel room for $1,500, it'll cost you less. Alright. And now the cherry on top. Well, the rules change from one region to another. In Asturias and Cantabria, that is the Atlantic coast, while bivouacking is tolerated in the mountains, it is strictly forbidden on the coast. In Castile, so further south inland, parking is not a problem as long as it's outside protected natural areas and tourist towns. Yes, because I forgot that detail, but basically wherever you are, if you're within a few kilometers of a campsite, they'll do everything they can to ban as much as they can to, well, basically force you to go to the campsite. And so in Castile, as I said, wild camping or bivouacking is forbidden on public land and in public forests, and on private land, you need the owner's permission. So if you make a spontaneous stop somewhere and you don't even know who owns the place, well, you can just assume it's forbidden. In Aragon, which is the next region on the path of the eclipse heading toward the Mediterranean, well, it's pretty much the same, meaning parking outside protected and tourist areas is allowed, and wild camping not allowed. You must also declare this to the authorities, at minimum by submitting a request to the nearest town hall. Well, once again, I don't see what's still wild about that kind of camping. As for Catalonia, on the Mediterranean side, it's even stricter. Even bivouacking is forbidden, except in designated areas and above 2,000 meters altitude. And above all, keep in mind that what I'm telling you here is based on information that's more or less up to date, and you can count on the Spanish authorities to put special rules in place for the eclipse. Everything I'm telling you now could soon be obsolete. So, in my humble opinion, the options for simply parking in spots without time limits are still the least risky. And I remind you that to be considered parked, nothing should stick out from your vehicle. It shouldn't be on blocks, and it should be parked in a spot where it can stay overnight. The totality zone will be 400 to 4,500 kilometers from the French border, depending on your starting point and destination. So, sleeping farther away, including in a hotel, and making the trip on the same day is still an option. However, since the eclipse ends at sunset, keep in mind that afterwards everyone will be hitting the roads. So, once again, plan for traffic jams, long drives back while being exhausted from an emotional day, or consider options like lodging, camping, or sleeping in your car, in short. Also, plan for what comes after the eclipse. Well, now comes the most interesting part. Whether you're driving all the way to Spain or just watching a partial eclipse from home, it's still about observing the sun. So, before anything else, let me say it again. A total solar eclipse can be observed with the naked eye, but before and after, there are inevitably partial phases, which are potentially dangerous. Because it's about observing the sun, normally it wouldn't occur to you to stare at it, but during an eclipse it's tempting to try. And don't assume I'm just stating the obvious. After every major solar eclipse, meaning a total eclipse but also sometimes highly publicized partial eclipses, events where the public observes it in large numbers after each of these eclipses. So there's a surge in appointments with ophthalmologists. So you might think I'm stating the obvious, but listen anyway, if only to protect your loved ones by explaining to them what not to do. Because we all have children around us. Or idiots. I've got plenty of those. Anyway, normally we're not tempted to look directly at the sun. But during an eclipse, lots of people will try to do it, especially since it feels like the light is weaker, so it's more bearable. Same goes for people tempted to use regular sunglasses. That's even worse. Because you'll find the sun even more bearable, and so you'll be tempted to look at it even longer. And you can very quickly burn your retina. And since you don't have nociceptors there, meaning nerve endings sensitive to pain, well, you won't even realize it. You'll look at the sun thinking, honestly, people make a big deal out of nothing. And the next day, you'll have a strange sensation, like an after image after looking at something too bright, except this one won't go away. And of course, it'll have the good sense to settle right on your fovea, the part of your visual field you use to read or see small details, the part of your visual field you naturally use to look at the sun, and then you'll join the long list of people who are going to make an appointment with the eye doctor. The eye doctor will tell you that you can't fix a burned retina and that you can only hope to recover a bit of visual acuity if the inflammation goes down. You'll also need to learn to use your peripheral vision. And so, to avoid that, there's a very simple solution: Eclipse glasses. They're just simple cardboard glasses equipped with an astrosolar type filter. Be careful, it's not just aluminum foil. I've seen people complain that €4 a pair is a ripoff and say they'll make their own with kitchen foil. No, just no, bad idea. Anyway, kitchen aluminum foil is opaque. It just doesn't work. Please, in general, avoid half-baked DIY solutions. Astronomy associations aren't known for being greedy, so if there were an easy and free way to look at the sun directly, you can be sure we'd recommend it to you. But since that's not the case, we recommend the astrosolar filter. It's a special filter that meets strict standards and only lets through 100,000th of the sunlight. So, not only am I telling you to get Eclipse glasses, but also get several pairs and don't wait until the last minute. Because the day before or 2 days before the eclipse, when all the sellers are out of stock, well, they're not going to order more by ship to get them a month later when nobody wants them anymore. Also keep in mind that as soon as TV channels with large audiences tell you to buy them, the stocks will disappear quickly. I suggested getting several pairs because you'll need them for yourself, your partner, kids, uncle, aunt, the neighbor, and more. Sharing just one pair with everyone is frustrating. And I won't even tell you what shape it'll be in once the kids start fighting over it. Because there's that too, huh? Always inspect them before use. At the slightest hole or scratch, throw them away. Keep them as a souvenir if you want, but hide them so no one is tempted to use them. And so, when Kevin and John Masturbane have torn the only pair they were supposed to share, well, you'll be glad to have some spares. No need to order them by the pallet, of course, but I always make sure to provide some for my loved ones. I'll put a link in the description that will take you to Optic Hunter London. They're friends and, more importantly, the main importer of astronomical equipment in Europe, even supplying other retailers. And just so no one thinks I have any hidden motives, I'm not getting a cent for giving you this link. If I'm giving it to you, it's because they're friends, and I'd rather recommend a quality site run by friends. Alright, that's the simplest and cheapest way to observe the eclipse directly, and throughout its entire duration. Especially, well, the partial phases, I already said if there were an easy, free way to directly observe the sun, all astronomy associations would inform you. It doesn't exist. On the other hand, there is an easy and free way to observe the sun indirectly. All astronomy associations explain this to you, and I'm going to explain it to you as well. It's a really simple DIY project using stuff you've got lying around or barely anything else, which you all already have, and it doesn't require more tools than a pair of scissors and a roll of tape, which you all already have as well. And this device is the combination of a pinhole and a camera obscura, a dark room, the ancestor of the camera. So, how does it work? Light travels in a straight line, and thanks to this principle, if you let it pass through a tiny hole to project it into a dark space, you'll be able to see the inverted image of what's outside the box. So all you have to do is get a cardboard box. On one side, cut out a small window a few centimeters wide. At the same time, you're going to cut out a piece of aluminum foil just a bit bigger than your window, and with a pin, you'll need to make a hole in the center, as small and as regular as possible. Stick this piece of aluminum foil over the window of your cardboard box, and since the foil is opaque and not at all a good solar filter, the light now only enters through the tiny hole you've made in it. On the opposite side, inside the cardboard box, stick a white sheet of paper. And that's it. See, I told you it wasn't hard. This hole in the aluminum is called a pinhole, and your box is a camera obscura. Camera obscura in Latin, which is where modern cameras get their name. It's very simple to use. You just point your box toward the sun until it projects the sunlight onto the white sheet. Of course, for the demo, I didn't have an eclipse. You see, so the circle you see there, that's the sun. This circle isn't due to the shape of my hole, okay? There's no point in hoping to get a bigger projection by making the hole in the foil larger. No, the pinhole should be as small and as regular as possible. If you want to make the projection bigger, the only way is to move the sheet further back, so use a bigger cardboard box. So I was telling you that I don't have an eclipse on hand to show you the demo, but this is the solar disk. And during an eclipse with this setup, you can see the moon gradually passing in front of the sun. Once totality arrives, you can safely observe it with the naked eye, and once the sun returns, go back to your pinhole camera for indirect observation. This is a perfect DIY project to keep your kids busy before the eclipse and even teach them the basics of optics. And if you don't want to shell out $4 for a pair of eclipse glasses, well, here's your free alternative. But, you know, I'm telling you from experience, on the day itself, you'll want to look directly. That being said, even if you don't want to make a pinhole camera, the pinhole effect is something you can observe around you, as long as you find a point of light in the middle of a shaded area. For example, it's in a tree's leaves, and there, through a strainer, you can even try with your fingers. Or a skimmer. There's also a pinhole camera variation where you project the image onto tracing paper at the back of a cardboard tube. I haven't tried it, but go ahead, there are many variations on Google. I'd like to take this opportunity to send a message to teachers of all kinds. Consider showing this DIY project to your students before the holidays and inviting them to recreate it for August. And it's the perfect opportunity to raise awareness about observing the sun safely. Because the worst thing you can do by far is to try to look at it with a magnifying tool. And by that, I mean refracting telescopes, birdwatching scopes, binoculars, and even cameras. It's simple. If there's glass or a mirror, you do not put your eye up to it. As they say, you can only observe the sun through a scope twice. Once with your left eye, once with your right eye. And after that, you'll need a cane and a dog. So obviously it's possible to use optical instruments if they've been properly filtered. But even then, I urge you to be cautious and also to always take preventive measures. I'll explain why. But first, I'll explain how to properly filter an optical instrument. The AstroSolar sheet. Again, I'll put a link in the description, and I'm still not making a cent from it. AstroSolar is essentially the same filter as in the earlier glasses, just in A4 size. If you think $30 for this is pricey, remember a trained golden retriever to help you cross the street costs even more. Let me show you something. This is a perfectly standard 75mm magnifying glass. If I focus sunlight with it, I only need a few seconds to set paper on fire. So just imagine your eyes if I tell you that in fact a refracting telescope, a telescope or binoculars are used to focus light. And what's more, a telescope is often much bigger than 75mm. It's simple. You won't just have a blind spot in your central vision, you'll need a guide dog. And the AstroSolar filter is precisely there to protect you from that. By letting in just 100,000th of sunlight, you can observe it through a magnifying device. But be careful, you'll need to make your filter carefully, make sure not to tear or scratch the AstroSolar sheet, and store it properly between observations for the same reasons. Similarly, it goes without saying, but it's better to say it, the astro-solar filter goes on the front of the optical instrument. Definitely not at the eyepiece, or it'll end up like my sheet of paper. And so I'm coming back to my warning. An A4 sheet might cost about $30, but if you cut it smartly, you have more than enough to cover a scope and a few pairs of binoculars. It's infinitely reusable as long as it's not damaged, so it can definitely be used for your future solar observations. The Sun is a dynamic star that changes daily, often revealing sunspots, which are sources of material eruptions. These eruptions create the northern lights when aimed at Earth. Astronomy can also be practiced during the day, and buying an astro-solar sheet for the occasion is like buying a pair of binoculars. It can be useful again in the future. So a good, carefully made filter is something you won't just throw away after the eclipse. But, well, the average person doesn't know what an astro-solar sheet is. And so, if you let someone look through your filtered telescope or binoculars, always make sure to tell them that they are looking through a device that has been specially filtered for the occasion, and not to try observing the Sun in any other way. Because if they don't know and basically have no idea about it, they might think that's how you observe the Sun, just with binoculars. And in fact, when they get home, they might be tempted to do the same thing with their own binoculars, taken out from the back of their closet, and those are not filtered at all. So always make sure to specify not to try to reproduce the experiment with another device that hasn't first been carefully filtered. Especially with children. Another recommendation: if you have several optical tools on hand, like a telescope and a pair of binoculars, and one of them isn't filtered, put it away. Because once again, someone who doesn't know any better will see you observing the Sun with one, think it's safe, grab the other, and burn their eyes. And once again, while this can definitely happen to an adult, I'm especially thinking about children. An eclipse is often enjoyed with family or friends, and if someone has binoculars or a telescope, everyone will be tempted to use them. So, anticipate the dumb things that people might do. It might seem trivial to you, especially if you have a basic understanding of astronomy, but don't forget that many people don't have that basic knowledge. Mistakes can happen fast, and a little prevention during an observation takes less than a minute. So, I'm going to go over it for you right now, and I ask you please to spread the message to the people around you on the big day to avoid a rush at the ophthalmologist's office. Alright, but let's take it up a notch. We've discussed observation, now let's cover taking pictures. Cell phones can't capture proper images of the Sun during the partial phase. At least, not directly, but just like before, you can take indirect pinhole images in nature that will be just as successful on your social media as the sky photo everyone else will have taken before you, and where anyway you can't really see much. During the total phase, of course, selfies will look great, but the Sun is very small in the sky, so don't expect to see the corona very well. My advice, since the Sun will be low on the horizon, is to equip yourself with a camera or a phone with a telephoto lens, so you can capture both the Sun and some nice scenery. There are already plenty of photos of partial or total eclipses alone in the sky on Google Images. If you want to take a beautiful photo that stands out, you'll need to make one that's a bit more unique. So, think creatively, but a good start might be to try to include a bit of landscape in it. For the photo, plan to use either a piece of solar filter film for the camera, or at the very least, a neutral density filter with a rating of 1000. So, for those in the know, write ND1000. Your camera can handle 1,000th of the light for a few seconds or minutes, but don't point it at the Sun for long periods. With an astro-solar filter, however, it will be safe. Similarly, the Sun is small and annoying to frame, so you might want to use a tripod. To photograph totality, however, you will need to remove the filter. And here, be especially careful. Indeed, a telephoto lens works exactly like a telescope. Or like my magnifying glass example earlier. To photograph totality, you'll need to get organized. First, depending on where you are, once again, take out your Eclipse app and check exactly how long totality will last. Allow for a safety margin of 10 to 15 seconds and set a timer on your phone. But do this beforehand, okay? Of course, totality is very short, you know. If you want to enjoy it a bit, you'll need to be organized. So, at the beginning of totality, the second the Sun disappears, start your timer. And then, and only then, remove your filter and take your photo. If you were smart enough to put a proper filter on your camera beforehand, it might still be almost pointed at the Sun, fixed on its tripod, and you'll save precious seconds that way. Because 90 or 100 seconds of totality is brief, especially if you spend 10 or 20 seconds searching for the sun through your telephoto lens while half panicking. So, take your photos, and when your timer goes off, it means there are only a few seconds left. Don't try to squeeze in a few more, put your filter back on and enjoy the rest of the show. If you're trying to photograph a diamond ring, the moment when the sun reappears, I actually recommend you cheat a little and try to capture the moment when it disappears first, but hey. But be careful, remove your filter at the very last second, and then when the sun comes back, put it back on immediately afterwards. Otherwise, you'll burn your sensor. Yes, by the way, I'm assuming that nowadays cameras have digital viewfinders, so if you look through them, at worst, you'll fry the camera. But if you still have a camera with an optical viewfinder, where you see directly what the camera sees, please don't look through it, you'll fry your eyes. The safest and probably also the most comfortable way is to use your camera screen while it's set up on a tripod. And in any case, be sure of what you're doing. Don't just wing it, and especially don't improvise. You won't have time. A total eclipse doesn't give you time to improvise. If you're not sure about your exposure settings, set your camera to take several different ones at once. In general, it's an option called bracketing. And obviously do some tests beforehand. And in any case, don't mess around with the filtering. Especially for the diamond ring. I warned you about the risks. If you burn something, it's your fault, right? So, let's take it up a notch. If you're regulars on the channel, you won't learn anything new, but for everyone else, I'll still take a couple of minutes to talk to you about automatic telescopes. These are telescopes designed to be foolproof. Even if you know absolutely nothing about astronomy, these things guide you step by step and let you observe the moon, the planets, or even deep sky objects like nebulae and galaxies, all while being ultra portable and set up in just 2 minutes flat. And with a solar filter optional for some, included by default with others, they can also track and image the sun. Yes, since I didn't mention it, but the sun moves across the sky, so you'll need to frequently recenter your eclipse glasses and cameras. So these scopes are able to track the sun in the sky, and since they send their images to your phone or a tablet, you can also observe with several people while being able to record what you see. On the other hand, price-wise, now you're looking at a real budget. For entry level at €700 nonetheless, I already talked to you at length about the C-Star from ZVO. But to make it very simple, the smaller an optical tool is, the lower its resolving power will be, meaning its ability to reveal details of what you're looking at. That's just how it is. It's the laws of quantum physics and light diffraction. I cover this in detail in the videos for each scope. Big telescopes aren't about competing for size, you know. Well, maybe a little bit, you know, but it's mostly a necessity if you want to see details. So, as I was saying, for entry level, I mentioned the C-Star S50 and its 50mm diameter, telling you that it was really small, and for me, honestly, the minimum you shouldn't go below. Except that in the meantime, ZWO stopped making the S50 and started producing the S30. I honestly don't recommend it to you. Alright, I'll put a link in the description for you, but it's small. Next to it, there's the S30 Pro, which according to Astronico has a really good optical system. It's way above what you find in other automatic scopes. But it's still only 30, so it's really made for wide fields, like big nebulae or small objects like the sun. I don't know. I haven't tested it. Maybe I'll try it one day, but anyway, it's about the same price as the S50. Astronico once again says it's really good, but well, there you go. So, same thing. Link in the description. Above that, you have the Odyssey from Unistellar, which, while still designed for deep sky observing, is meant to be a bit more specialized for planetary viewing than the other models. With an optional solar filter, it is capable of automatically pointing at the sun. It's a telescope, a reflector telescope, 80mm, but you can find it starting at €2,000. And here as well, I did a full review of it some time ago, and I'm putting it in the info card for you. And again, I'm putting a link to the scope in the description for you. In the same category, you have the Vespera from Vonis. It'll cost you a bit less, €1,600, but it's a 50mm refractor. Apparently it's really good according to other astro YouTubers who've tested it, but I haven't personally handled it. So, solar filter is optional, and the link is in the description. Alright, that was for automatic telescopes, devices that guide you both day and night, and that aren't just usable for the eclipse, but also for astronomy in general. But now, we're going to talk about equipment dedicated solely to the sun. Equipment that is also automatic, that takes a little more time to set up, like 1 or 2 minutes more, but is way more impressive in terms of what you can see. Actually, in astronomy, it's like in many other fields. You can either do everything moderately well, or you can excel, but only in one thing. Automatic telescopes can do everything, but you won't get an image worthy of specialized equipment. Well, here we're actually going to take a look at some refractor telescopes that are only used to observe the sun, but with which you can see this. And if up until now I've put links in the description without making a cent from them here, I have to declare, let's say, a conflict of interest. But that's not much different from usual. Basically, here's what happened. Some time ago, Damien from Optic Hunter Linden, Astronico's colleague, gave me a call asking if I had a slot for a sponsorship. Except I haven't had any for a long time. So, well, I told him no, but that I was going to talk about the Eclipse this summer, so I offered him a deal. Optic Hunter Linden lends me some awesome gear that I've had my eye on for a while. I test it out, and if they make enough sales after this review, well, I might get to keep one of the scopes. So, to be very clear, the gear we're going to talk about, I'm not saying good things about it because I was paid to. I'm saying good things about it because I actually think it's good, and I hope I can keep it if they make some sales on their end. But beyond that, I haven't made a cent for talking to you about it. The money this video will make comes from the sponsorship, as usual. And so now we're going to talk about H-alpha telescopes. These are telescopes with a Fabry-Perot interferometer inside them. So to explain to you what a Fabry-Perot interferometer is, I did some research on my own, and well, we're going to do a bit of an approximation here, otherwise it'll turn into a quantum physics lesson. If you superimpose two electromagnetic waves, they interfere with each other. Basically, it's like on the surface of water. If you superimpose two medium waves, you get a big wave, and if you superimpose a wave and a trough, well, you don't get any wave at all. According to this principle, we will place two semi-reflective mirrors facing each other so that they reflect the light back and forth, causing it to interfere with itself. And by doing this, we will try to cancel out all the wavelengths except one. The line at 656.3 nanometers, give or take 0.05 nanometers. So, at the input, you have all the sunlight, and at the output, only that wavelength and only that wavelength. When you observe the sun with a standard filter, you reduce all the light by a factor of 100,000. So, you can see the sunspots, but the prominences or the convective cells, which are much less bright compared to the rest, are invisible to you. By limiting your observation to the ionized hydrogen line, these details are revealed. And you can see the filaments of ejected matter, the storms on the surface of the star, in short, the sun as professional astronomers usually present it. But with a precision of about 0.05 nanometers, let me tell you, we're dealing with precision equipment here. And that's why Fabry-Perot interferometer telescopes, well, they cost a fortune. Until now, they were mainly made by the brand Lunt, and you had to spend a good 10,000 euros to get one. And the worst part is that the interferometer is built into the telescope and it blocks so much light that you need something at least as bright as the sun to see anything through it. Some astronomer friends had fun doing the math, and if you observe a nebula with that, it would take 2 days for a single photon, just one photon, to pass through the filter. We're discussing telescopes designed only for solar observation. So far, they've also been very expensive. But Lunt is becoming harder and harder to find in Europe, and two other brands have started making them, Acuter and Skywatcher, which are known for making affordable and good quality equipment. But as for affordable, yes and no, you're still looking at between 1,200 and 5,000 euros. Well, anyway, let's check it out. And at the same time, I asked Optic Winter Linden to lend me something else, a solar mount, the Solar Quest, also from Skywatcher. And that's why I was telling you we're dealing with automatic equipment. This mount is awesome. All you have to do is put it on its tripod, roughly horizontal and roughly facing north. And when I say rough, I mean really rough. You point it north just by eyeballing it. Then all you have to do is turn it on. It uses 8 AA batteries, and after several full afternoons of testing, the batteries still aren't dead. And it works with rechargeable batteries. In short, once it's turned on, it automatically finds its GPS position and gets the time through the GPS signal. By doing this, it knows the height of the sun, and it will spin around until the small built-in sensor detects it and locks onto it. From then on, it stays on target. Unlike equatorial mounts that must be precisely aligned with the celestial pole, a hassle during the day, this azimuthal mount simply moves up, down, left and right. And for the sun, that's more than enough. But obviously its sensor is designed to catch the sun and nothing else. It's a solar mount. But it's also by far the easiest mount to use that I've ever used. It actually sets up as fast as an automatic telescope. It's even simpler, you just point it north and turn it on with nothing to connect or calibrate. So for this one it's 485 euros and well, the link is in the description. We're now going to attach 3 telescopes to this mount. The Acuter Elite Phoenix, the smallest of the 3 with its 40mm, as well as the Skywatcher Heliostar 76mm and its big sister, the Heliostar 100mm. These are 3 Fabry-Perot interferometer telescopes. Their main difference is obviously their diameter. I'm not an expert, but it seems Skywatcher was smart to place the interferometer at a spot in the optical path where it can be smaller and less expensive. But overall, it's still precision equipment, and the bigger it is, the more glass there is, glass that spends months cooling in ovens. In short, with optical equipment, prices skyrocket quickly with diameter. Nothing new under the sun, as they say. And so, unsurprisingly, the most expensive of the 3 is the Heliostar 100 mm, which still comes in at 5,000 euros. It comes in a large foam padded case, which is good given its price, with a very practical sunshade, the diagonal with a blocking filter, which is essential for use. A 22mm eyepiece in the 1¼ inch format and an adapter so you can use your 2-inch eyepieces. When delivered, it already has its dovetail bar and a very practical solar finder. You just need to align the sunlight with the hole. So using an automatic or motorized mount is absolutely not necessary, right? It's just more comfortable. On paper, the Solar Quest is able to carry it, and it's true that since they're from the same brand, it would have been dumb for Skywatcher not to anticipate that. The mount is almost at its limit with the telescope's 6 kilos. It works, but the mount is clearly giving you the side eye, warning you not to add your big camera on top. In these conditions, for purely visual observation, honestly it's fine. I left the 100 on the mount for an entire afternoon and the tracking wasn't affected. Well, I'm still going to make a side note. To image the sun, I bought a small camera from ZWO, the ASI AZ 174mm. On Nico's advice, because yeah, he knows how to calculate field equivalences and resolving power based on the photosite size, but I don't. It's a black and white camera optimized for planetary imaging. It's tiny, so it doesn't noticeably affect the mount's load factor, and you just need to connect it to a USB port on a PC. So yeah, it's less simple than an automatic scope, but it's still very easy. That was just to explain where this image comes from. And the 100 mems magnification with its 760 monofocal length makes the sun fit perfectly in the camera's field of view. Next we have the Heliostar 76mm, also from Skywatcher. And before talking about it, I want to point out that I'm swapping telescopes on the fly and the mount doesn't care at all. Switching telescopes like this has absolutely no impact on the sun tracking, which continues uninterrupted thanks to the built-in sensor that constantly corrects the pointing. So, the 76mm is just a little sister of the 100mm. It's delivered the same way with only a slight difference. There's no longer an adapter for 2-inch eyepieces, but instead there's a smartphone adapter. But before talking about this one, as you might expect with its 600mm minus, the telescope has a focal length of 160mm, which is shorter than its bigger sister. Which means, all other things being equal, a lower magnification. And this lower magnification means that, once again, all other things being equal, you don't notice the lower resolution caused by the smaller diameter. The sun just looks a bit smaller, but not less sharp. This image was taken under the same conditions as the previous one. On the other hand, the beast is 2.2 keyon lighter than its big sister, and the price is almost cut in half. Basically, before, the scope alone cost 5,000 bucks. Now a little over 3,000 with the mount. So let's talk a little bit about the smartphone adapter. We'd already seen it in the sponsored segment about Little Maxi, small case, big acuter. So it's good, but it's not amazing either. Pretty much any phone can be attached to it. However, when you have multiple lenses, that's when the trouble starts. Because I don't know how phones decide which one to choose, but honestly, it's still a lot of internal guesswork. I tried with an Android and an iPhone, and I thought that each lens corresponded to a different zoom level, but apparently that's not the case. The phone switches from one to the other, even with manual zoom, so you have to fight to get the right one and keep it. On top of that, it's likely to see the stand when it's in wide angle and want to activate a macro mode. Basically, I kind of felt like I was trying to tame a pony with a bad attitude. Not impossible like a rodeo on a wild Mustang, you know. But you see, the little pony that doesn't want to cooperate, well, it's kind of the same. And that's the first step. Because then, in an H-alpha telescope, you don't see the sun like that. That's a black and white image that's been recolored. No. Actually, it looks more like this. Because the hydrogen line, 656.3 nanometers actually, that's red. Already, that's pretty close to infrared, so it's not just vaguely reddish, you know, it's seriously red. And your phone isn't calibrated for it. So its white balance is way off. So it might be a good idea to switch it entirely to manual mode and set it yourself instead. And so, after a few tries, I quickly managed to get a decent image, but it's still much less contrasted compared to the little ASI 174mm. By the way, the images I'm showing you here don't do justice at all to what you see live. The dynamic range of the human eye is nothing like that of a small phone camera or even an astro camera. With the naked eye you can see the prominences much better, and the storms aren't just white spots, they're full of details. I really like this 76mm one. It works very well with the field of view of the little ASI 174mm. It is perfectly supported by the mount, and it's a good compromise between resolving power and size. So I'll just say it outright, that's the one I hope to keep at the end of the test and take with me to Spain. By the way, I even see a lot of potential in it for sidewalk astronomy. Picture yourself in the city center on a nice day, letting people look through it and explaining what they see. Alright, so now let's move on to the last of the three, the little Elite Phoenix from Acuter. And this one is very surprising. So, obviously, when you have a 40mm diameter with a 400mm focal length, it means a lower resolving power and magnification than the two Skywatchers. All other things being equal, here's the sun through the 100, the 76, and the Acuter. But it comes with some significant advantages. First of all, its solar finder is just as well made as the Skywatchers. It also has the good sense to come with a zoom eyepiece, so you don't need to change it to change magnification. It comes with a phone holder, and most importantly, the interferometer is removable. So, on one hand, you have the interferometer and the filtered diagonal for observing the sun, and on the other, the telescope without its interferometer, which then has a 91mm diameter, and with an unfiltered diagonal for, well, observing the rest of the sky. However, be careful, these three telescopes are achromatic. Chromatic aberration is when you have colors that bleed and create ugly colored fringes on high contrast objects. Apochromatic glass, where the colors don't bleed or bleed very little, well, on H-alpha telescopes it doesn't make any sense. Well, yeah, you're only observing a single shade of red, at 0.5 angstrom bandwidth. So the other colors can bleed. That would just add an unnecessary cost to a device that's already expensive. And so, the Hooter, like the other two, is achromatic. So, it doesn't matter when observing the sun, but as soon as you remove the interferometer to casually observe the moon, well, the colors bleed. Well, no more than in any other achromatic telescope, you know? There's absolutely nothing dramatic about it. It doesn't suddenly turn into a Coke bottle lens. But still, you need to know it anyway. And so, this Acuter, besides being more versatile than the others, comes with a major advantage. Its price. Less than 1,200 euros, and for an H-alpha scope, well, let's be honest, that's not expensive. Because Skywatcher scopes are only used to observe the sun and nothing else. The Fabry-Perot Etalon cannot be disassembled. Here, you have a compact instrument which of course is not a super powerful telescope, but with which you can hope to make out a few large nebulae. Its short focal length makes planets look tiny. But on the other hand, it will do well with the moon, but above all, well, it's a telescope that you can also use during the day. And while a standard instrument with a solar filter will only show you sunspots, the interferometer will let you observe prominences, storms, and convective cells. And if you want to ask me why I still prefer the Skywatcher, well, there are two reasons. 1. The 76 Minios is more compatible with my camera. It's the perfect balance for photos. And 2. Versatility actually, I don't really care about it because I have my Odyssey next to me for imaging the moon, my Ivy scope for deep sky, and the Seastar if I don't want to bother and just want something ultra portable. But if it's not a selling point for me, it might be one for others, so well, I'm mentioning it. And so I'm still going to finish with one thing. Why spend so much money on a telescope that's only for observing the sun? Well, first of all, if you don't want to or you can't spend that much, really don't do it. But for once, unlike smart telescopes that are very mainstream, here we're dealing with equipment that's a bit more specialized. Wondering if you want one of these telescopes is a bit like asking yourself if you want to spend $5,000 on a saxophone when there are really good guitars for $200. The real question is, do you want to play the saxophone? In astronomy, to do something right, you need specialized equipment. And that's not just true for solar. A setup that's good for planetary observation isn't suitable for deep sky, and vice versa. Solar observation is a distinct type of astronomy. In general, astronomy means darkness, cold, solitude, using a headlamp so you don't bump into the tripod you spent half an hour setting up, and long sessions of darks, flats, and offsets. Solar astronomy is about warmth, light, and maybe even a barbecue heating up nearby. Smart telescopes are also useful because at night, in the cold, you don't necessarily want to mess around. You may prefer watching from your warm home while the scope runs outside over Wi-Fi. But here, in the sun, taking 2 more minutes to unfold the tripod, screw on the mount, put the telescope on it, and stay behind to look directly through it, well, it's immediately a lot less unpleasant. The sun is also a very lively star that changes from one day to the next. The prominences appear and disappear, and it also rotates on its axis in about 2 weeks. From 1 month to the next, you will see the same moon twice, but you will never see the same sun twice. So indeed, of course, there's the eclipse this summer, but the sun remains observable all year round. And I'm absolutely not telling you that it's mind-blowing, okay? But if that's the kind of thing you're into, well, clearly, H-alpha is simply incomparable to standard filtering. Like I said, this isn't sponsored, okay? I don't have any discount codes or anything like that. I'll put some links in the description, and I think Nico will make some tracked links for me to see if you click on them and if it's worth letting me keep the 76. But that's all there is to it. And if I put links for OptiCounter Linden and not anywhere else, just know that since they're the importers for Europe, well, if you get it elsewhere, it'll go through their warehouses anyway. But if you go to their store, please, when you walk in, shout, "Astro Nico is an idiot." But no, not yet. That way, they'll know you're coming from me. And who knows, you might even be able to negotiate a discount with Nico. There you go, clean up, Nico, your own mess. However, I'm going to give you another warning. Those Skywatches definitely aren't cheap. You might be tempted by the second-hand market. If that's the case, definitely don't buy without trying it first. It turns out that the first series that was manufactured was defective. Not dangerous, but the glasses had a rather annoying optical defect that prevented proper isolation of the hydrogen alpha line. Basically, it just means that part of the sun is overexposed. It's stupid, really. This was the very first series produced, so they weren't put on the market. Except that some guys in Eastern European countries bought the batch and put them up for sale, especially on the second-hand market, presenting them as, well, the later series which are free from this defect. So, when buying second-hand, always try it out. And if you can't get a uniform solar disk when adjusting the interferometer, well, consider passing on it. Well, I think it's time to wrap up this very long video. Each of your situations is different, and for those who can't, don't want to, or can't afford to see the eclipse, I can't give a one-size-fits-all message. But I'll still say this, in my life, I've witnessed 3 total solar eclipses, including 2 on the other side of the world. It's a phenomenon that's both common worldwide and at the same time rare for an individual. But it's also one of those natural spectacles that you have to experience. I think everyone should see it at least once in their life, because life is short, so if it's not at least a little filled with memorable experiences, I think we're missing out on something. So my thoughts are, obviously with everyone who won't be able to make it on August 12th, but for the others, if you're hesitating to go see it, thinking, well, it's just an eclipse, I've already seen one on TV, experiencing it in person is an entirely different and incredible experience. It might be a bit like watching skydiving on TV or actually doing it yourself. So obviously, given the crowds that are likely to be there and the local rules, you'll need to plan the logistics a bit in advance and mentally prepare yourself to deal with traffic jams. But personally, I think it's worth it. I'm proof of that. I'll make the trip myself. If you've never seen a total eclipse, you can't attend one and honestly say, meh, it wasn't that great. It's something you have to see. So for August 12th, I wish more than ever that you look up at the sky and be stellar. See you next time.